Once, Hollywood sparkled with dazzling lights, red carpets, and stars worshipped as flawless icons. But then Paul Newman shattered the illusion with a blunt revelation that shook the entire industry. Behind the radiant smiles and golden Oscars lay shadows darker than any villain ever portrayed on screen. He spoke of starlet mothers who turned their own children into victims, of powerful actors luring underage girls into locked rooms, and of giants whose fists left colleagues collapsing on set. These were no longer roles from a script, but real crimes that Hollywood had buried for decades. And among the names Newman revealed, the final one would send chills down anyone's spine. That name was Errol Flynn, the charming Robin Hood who once stood trial on charges involving two young girls. In the late 1930s, when The Adventures of Robin Hood premiered, millions flocked to theaters to see the youthful Flynn, with his dazzling smile, mischievous eyes, and unmatched spirit of adventure. Photoplay magazine even hailed him as the man every woman desired and every man longed to become. But beneath that shining facade, Flynn's life was clouded with endless whispers, rumors that echoed from Beverly Hills to the Sunset Strip. The peak came in 1942, when he stood trial in Los Angeles over charges involving two underage girls. For months, the Los Angeles Examiner blazed the story across its front pages, even running the headline, "Robin Hood in the Dock." In court, prosecutors described scenes from a lavish Hollywood Hills apartment where Flynn often hosted all-night parties. One anonymous witness told the Daily News, the room was always heavy with smoke and laughter. Flynn entered like a king, surrounded by faces far too young to belong there. The case packed the courtroom with fans, reporters, and even foreign correspondents. In the end, Flynn was acquitted. Walking out, he lit a cigarette and smirked, "The ladies will still love this Robin Hood." When Paul Newman later heard those words, he admitted, "I had never seen arrogance so raw." And so Flynn walked free, defiant to the last. Variety hailed it as Robin Hood's victory over justice. Yet within Hollywood, many knew the acquittal was less about innocence and more about influence, a web of power stretching from Warner Brothers to journalists who chose silence to protect a bankable star. Though cleared in court, Flynn could never escape the constant whispers. In 1945, columnist Sheila Graham of the Hollywood Citizen News wrote, "If the walls of Errol Flynn's mansion could talk, they would tell stories Hollywood would never dare reveal." Rumors swirled around his Mulholland Drive estate, tales of marathon parties where wine poured endlessly and the rooms filled with girls far too young to sense the danger. One chilling account came from a servant's memoir, claiming he once watched Flynn force guests to sing until the actor was satisfied. Any who refused were thrown out immediately, some even blacklisted from sets where Flynn appeared. Though never verified, such stories added to the image of a man as magnetic as he was menacing. By 1959, his life ended abruptly in Vancouver, Canada. Just 50 years old, Flynn died while rumored to be fleeing debts and scandals that had never stopped chasing him. The coroner's report offered a final, haunting note: his body resembled that of a man 2 decades older. The public was left in shock, and the New York Post ran a sharp headline, "Robin Hood Dead, Leaves Behind a Legacy of Films and Secrets." What unsettled people most was that despite the shadows, Hollywood still elevated Flynn into legend. His image as the fearless, heroic Robin Hood remained untouched, while the darkness behind him was quietly buried under silence. But Flynn was not alone. At the same time, another star carried an even more sacred image. Yet behind that graceful beauty was a mother whose cruelty froze those closest to her. That star was Joan Crawford. Chapter 2: Joan Crawford, the Tyrant. A mother who turned fame into a weapon against her children. In 1979, during an interview with the New York Times, Paul Newman leaned back in a wooden chair. His cold gaze fixed on the reporter, and suddenly the Manhattan room grew heavy. In his deep, deliberate voice he said, "Never believe an Oscar can hide the darkness inside a family." Joan Crawford is the clearest proof. The world held its breath on a March evening in 1946, when Crawford, wrapped in a flawless white satin gown, stepped onto the stage to claim her Oscar for Mildred Pierce. The hall sparkled with applause. Variety ran the headline, "Hollywood's Queen Reborn." But only hours later, inside her Brentwood mansion, the glow gave way to horror. A maid, whose testimony appeared in the Los Angeles Daily News in 1981, recalled that after the celebration, Crawford stormed into her daughter Christina's room and dragged the 11-year-old out of bed. She ordered the girl to stand before a mirror and sing the American national anthem. When Christina's voice faltered, a vicious slap sent her crashing onto the marble floor. "That crack still haunts my dreams," the witness recalled. Years later, Christina described her childhood in Mommy Dearest as a gilded prison. Wire hangers became whips. Glass ashtrays turned into weapons. One former classmate told ABC News, "In the sweltering heat of July, Christina still wore long sleeves. When I asked why, she whispered, 'My mother doesn't want anyone to see the bruises.'" The torment went far beyond beatings. Crawford placed an hourglass in her daughter's room, forcing her to stand still until the last rain fell. If it tipped, the punishment was doubled. A diary entry from a housemaid revealed another chilling scene. Once she made Christina kneel before a crucifix for hours, screaming, "You should thank God for having me as your mother." It was like witnessing some twisted ritual. The cruelty was masked by appearances. To the world, Crawford was the perfect mother. In May 1950, Life magazine featured her on its cover, smiling with her adopted children. But photographer Lawrence Schiller later confessed that just before the shoot, Christina had been beaten so hard her comb snapped. Minutes later, she was forced to pose with a radiant smile. The nightmare did not end with Crawford's passing in 1977. At the reading in Manhattan, the room fell silent as the lawyer revealed a single chilling line. "For reasons which they well know, Christina and Christopher are excluded from any share of the estate." The two children who had endured the most were cut off from millions. The Washington Post later called it the coldest will in Hollywood history. One attorney present whispered, "It was the only time I ever saw a mother exact revenge on her children from beyond the grave." In an interview with Esquire, Paul Newman reflected, "Crawford may have been royalty on the screen, but inside her home she was a tyrant. The most terrifying part was how she found a way to punish even after death." If Joan Crawford ruled with terror through beatings and control, the next figure Newman named inspired fear in another form, through scandal and vice. That figure was Bing Crosby. Chapter 3, Bing Crosby, the hellish father whose abuse drove two of his children to take their own lives. They called him the King of Christmas. But in 1982, speaking to Esquire, Paul Newman's eyes burned with restrained fury as he said, "Never forget what kind of father he really was." To the world, he was America's golden voice, Bing Crosby, the man whose White Christmas became the best-selling song of all time. In the 1950s, Life magazine celebrated him with glowing family portraits, while NBC crowned him America's model father. But behind the gates of his grand Holmby Hills estate, his children lived under constant terror. Gary Crosby, the eldest son, revealed in his 1983 memoir Going My Own Way, "There were winter nights when I clutched my pillow, shaking in the corner, listening for his footsteps on the stairs. My chest tightened. When the door flew open, the nightmare began again. He always had a belt in his hand, and every strike across my back made me wish I could disappear." Years later on Larry King Live, Gary broke down in tears. He never hugged me. Never spoke a kind word. The only thing I remember is his cold stare as the belt came down. The torment spread to his other children as well. Lindsey Crosby was hospitalized multiple times at Cedars-Sinai for psychiatric care. Friends recalled that whenever Christmas songs played on the radio, he would shake and break into a sweat, as if each note carried him back to those beatings. Dennis Crosby never escaped the weight of his father's cruelty. Before ending his life in 1989, he left a note that read, "I still hear his growls. I tried to forgive, to forget, but every Christmas the nightmare returned. I can't go on." Just 1 year later, Lindsey too ended his life with a gun. The Los Angeles Herald-Examiner ran the bleak headline, "Christ King's Sons Die on Winter Nights." In 1992, the Los Angeles Times published an investigation where a former tour musician confessed, "I was outside the dressing room. I heard shouting, the crack of a blow, then a child sobs, and silence. We all heard it, but no one dared speak. To talk meant the end of your career." Arguments spread over the roots of Crosby's violence. The Washington Post quoted psychologists who blamed his own harsh upbringing with alcoholic parents. But Paul Newman refused to accept that. At a 1985 Hollywood Reporter panel, he cut in sharply, "Don't use his childhood as an excuse. He beat his children because he enjoyed the power. On stage, he ruled with his voice. At home, he demanded the same control over his family." The most chilling part was the silence of Hollywood. Everyone knew, yet no one dared to speak. The studios needed Bing Crosby untarnished, the flawless voice to sell records, the wholesome image to light up the screen. And so the cries for help were drowned out by the echo of White Christmas. Paul Newman shook his head, then abruptly turned to another name, not a father this time, but a woman with eyes like daggers and a voice that could both seduce and command. She was celebrated as a symbol of beauty and allure, yet behind the curtain stood a master manipulator, one willing to twist love and even war to serve her ambitions. That woman was Marlene Dietrich. Chapter 4, Marlene Dietrich, the goddess manipulator who turned love into tragedy. On a September night in 1955, at a glittering Beverly Hills high society party, the doors swung open. Marlene Dietrich appeared in a sleek black tuxedo, cigarette holder poised between her fingers, her eyes glinting like blades. The chatter in the room fell silent. A Los Angeles Times reporter later recalled, "It felt as if the air grew colder the moment she entered. Everyone thought she was there to choose her prey." Dietrich was not just the star of The Blue Angel, 1930. She had turned seduction into a weapon. Every affair was a calculated move on her chessboard. Men fell for her carefully staged tenderness. Women admired her audacity and rare defiance, but the most frightening pattern was this: anyone who stepped into Marlene's game was left shattered, drained, broken, or erased from memory. French cinema titan Jean Gabin, once celebrated as the man she loved most, sank into depression after she abandoned him, retreating into a life of solitude. Renowned author Eric Maria Remarque was treated little more than a walking wallet. Friends recalled that whenever Dietrich appeared, his royalties disappeared, spent on her extravagant shopping sprees and endless parties. Within Hollywood's hidden lesbian circles, her impact cut just as deep. Whispers linked her to Greta Garbo, MGM's untouchable ice goddess. Soon after, Garbo retreated further into seclusion, vanishing from public life for decades. With screenwriter Mercedes de Acosta, Dietrich allegedly exploited her influence before discarding her. De Acosta died destitute, abandoned, and forgotten. Even Claudette Colbert was rumored to have crossed her path. When Colbert chose career over a shadowy affair, Dietrich severed ties, leaving Colbert plagued by gossip for years. In Paris, the story of Edith Piaf turned even darker. After a brief, destructive affair with Dietrich, Piaf fell into alcohol and pills. Friends recalled seeing her collapse backstage, sobbing over a love that had never truly been returned. Marlene's shadow drove Edith Piaf deeper into self-destruction, and Hollywood bore its own scars as well. In 1961, The Hollywood Reporter published an anonymous account of a young actress who tore up her $1 million contract just to follow Dietrich. Within months, abandoned and penniless, she lost every role, fell into debt, and was later found hanging in her Santa Monica apartment. Her suicide note contained only 3 words, "I hate you." Even her own daughter was not spared. In her 1992 memoir, Maria Riva recalled a childhood spent watching her mother treat men and women like stage props. She remembered waiting backstage for hours while Dietrich disappeared with yet another lover. But why was Dietrich this way? Scholars argue that her obsession with power began in her German youth, when she learned that seduction could unlock any door, whether political or artistic. To her, love was never about sharing. It was proof that she could command, like directing roles in a script. Paul Newman, one of the few who resisted her influence, summed it up in a 1983 CBS interview. Marlene treated human emotion like a deck of cards, and she played the game better than anyone. Chapter 5, Mickey Rooney, accused of preying on Elizabeth Taylor at just 14. In 1974, during a private conversation, Elizabeth Taylor broke down in tears as she recalled her years under MGM. Paul Newman later told Vanity Fair, "Liz looked at me, her voice trembling. You don't understand. Mickey Rooney terrified me more than anyone. He wasn't the man people saw on the screen." That was when Newman realized the truth. Behind Hollywood's beloved golden boy was a darker figure who left scars on many. Through the 1930s and 1940s, Rooney was MGM's most bankable star. The Andy Hardy series turned him into America's symbol of innocence, earning the studio millions. In 1939, Life magazine praised him as the little star with the biggest smile in Hollywood. Yet, the stories whispered backstage painted a far more disturbing picture. A lighting technician once told the Los Angeles Times that Rooney could smile for the camera one moment, then explode the next, shouting and smashing props if anything went wrong. But the most disturbing stories were about how he treated Elizabeth Taylor when she was only 14 or 15. After National Velvet, 1944, Taylor became MGM's most treasured star. At the same time, Rooney, nearly 25 and already one of Hollywood's biggest names, began pursuing her. In a 2003 ABC News feature, a classmate from Taylor's acting lessons recalled, "Liz wore heavy sweaters in the heat of summer just to shield herself from Rooney's stare. One day she clutched my hand, her voice shaking, and whispered, 'I just want to get out of here as quickly as I can.'" Taylor's diaries from that period, later released by her family, revealed endless sleepless nights and the suffocating feeling of being trapped inside MGM's golden cage. Hollywood, however, remained silent. MGM protected Rooney at all costs, their prized moneymaker. In 1945, columnist Hedda Hopper briefly hinted at Rooney's behavior, but was forced to retract within 24 hours. A former editor later admitted to The Hollywood Reporter, "We were given strict orders, Mickey Rooney must remain untouchable. Anyone who wrote otherwise would be shut down immediately." Taylor carried the scars for the rest of her life. Friends recalled that whenever Rooney's name came up, she would fall silent and avert her gaze. In the 1960s, when a reporter mentioned him, she abruptly walked out of the interview. The wound never closed. Rooney's own life was no less turbulent. He married 8 times, some unions collapsing in only a few months. His ex-wife Ava Gardner once told a reporter that living with Rooney was like living beside a storm, never knowing when it would sweep you away. Former managers whispered that he bullied young actresses, abusing the quiet protection MGM afforded him. When fame finally faded, Rooney sank into debt, squandered fortunes on gambling, and at one point survived on welfare. He often lamented that Hollywood had abandoned him, but insiders muttered, he's only reaping what he once sowed. In his final years, Rooney lived in poverty and isolation, needing lawyers to shield him from financial exploitation by his own family. Asked about Rooney during a 1982 press conference for the verdict, Paul Newman simply said, "Hollywood smiles often hide shadows, and sometimes those shadows are darker than any villain you'll see on screen." Mickey Rooney stood as the clearest proof of Hollywood's duplicity. To the public, he was the innocent boy America adored. But to Elizabeth Taylor and many of his young co-stars, he was a figure of fear. And if Rooney's obsession and aggression spread terror behind the curtains, Kirk Douglas would take it even further. Chapter 6: Kirk Douglas, the eccentric predator with a fixation on girls under 20. If Bing Crosby horrified the public with his cruelty toward his own family, Douglas unsettled Hollywood with decades of whispers about his predatory behavior. The bitter irony was undeniable. He embodied the ultimate image of American masculinity, the unbreakable Spartacus, a hero worshipped by millions. On screen, he was a warrior. Off-screen, witnesses described something far darker, a man consumed by power and sexual hunger. The rumors surrounding Douglas first circulated in the 1950s, but studios and the press buried them, unwilling to endanger one of their most profitable stars. The most disturbing story of all involved Natalie Wood. In the summer of 1954, Natalie was just 15 when her mother, Maria Gurdon, brought her to the Chateau Marmont Hotel on Sunset Boulevard. According to Lana Wood's 2020 memoir Little Sister, the meeting was presented as a golden chance for Douglas to guide Natalie's career. But only hours later, the teenage star returned home shaken, her eyes swollen with tears, her clothes disordered. Newman himself may not have been innocent. Perhaps he too was part of that ruthless system, using truth itself to shield his own secrets. What do you think? Do these legends still deserve praise? And was Newman truly a whistleblower or also a hidden predator? Leave your comments below, share your perspective, and don't forget to subscribe so we can keep unearthing Hollywood's darkest secrets buried beneath its golden dust. Because the next name exposed might just be the very idol you still admire.